All right, Mr. G here. We're going to connect the dots. This is where the creative process starts taking off for me. We've constructed our 8 basic measures using whole notes, and we're using, by the way, the first major scale melody. And now we're going to make things a little bit more linear, take away some of the leaps and skips and stuff, and make it flow a little bit better. And that's why you'll see why I call it connecting the dots here in a minute. We're going to start with the violin 1 part. The first thing I do is I look for wherever there's skips and leaps. The first skip we have is the D up to the F, second to the third measure. So what I did down here is I filled in the note that's in between the third. The D to the F, well, what's in between an E? So I added a D, E, F. The next skip we see is measure 4 to measure 5, an E down to a C. Well, guess what? I filled in the note in between. The E, C has a D in between. I put half notes. Just using half notes right now. Then we have another skip from the C down to the A. So I filled in between the C and the A. I filled in with the B. Then we have a leap from an A up to the D. Whenever possible, when I have something bigger than a third, I have a selection of notes. I could put a B or a C in here. Which one should I use? Well, the chord is an F. It's an F chord, right? A B doesn't fit well with an F chord. So generally my thought is, if I have something bigger than a skip, something bigger than a third, my second half note is going to be a chord tone of whatever chord I'm in, the closest one to it. So I could come down to an F, or I could put a C in here. I tend to I remember a class I took years and years and years ago when I talked about voice doublings. And the gentleman who taught that course said that the most appropriate notes to double are the root of a chord and the fifth. Try not to double the third. So C is the fifth of an F chord. So I put a C in. And that finishes off our violin 1 part. Violin 2, we really only have one big skip. We have an E, or leap I should say, E up to the B. Well, what chord are we in? We are in a C chord, so here's my E. My half note then, I'm going to put it on the next available chord tone in the chord of C, which is a G. All right, so we got E, G, B. All right, and that finishes off violin 2 because everything else is pretty stepwise. Viola, we have a big leap from G up to the C. So there's my G. Now the chord we're in a G chord, right? I could have put a B, G, B, because that's the next available chord tone. But again, I didn't, my instructor says, hey, try to avoid doubling thirds. So I'm not going to put a B in here. B is the third of the chord. So I'm going to go to the next chord tone available to me, which is a D, right there. We continue on. We have a skip from the C up to the E. So I'm going to put a D in between with half notes, right? Then we come back to the C from the E. So I'm going to put E, D, put that D in between, connect the dots there. Then we have one more skip on the viola part. It's the B down to the G. Here's my B. I put an A in between, connected the dots. Now, we've got our cello part. We have a leap from the C down to the G. So what do? Well, my next closest chord tone is a G right there. Well, I'm going to a G. So let me approach that G from an A. There's no chord tone that's close to that G that makes sense, but an A sounds good against a C chord. Again, that's experience and the fact that C and an A minor chord are so closely related to each other. By me going to this A, I'm actually changing this C chord to an A minor chord. Listen to this. It's, just because I changed the bass note, it changed it to an A minor chord. So A is a good note. And A is a good note in the C chord. All right, then I go to a G. We're good there. Come back. Now we have a leap from an F up to a C. Well, here's my F. What I'm going to do is go to the next available chord tone between the notes, which happens to be an A. So I'm good there. But again, that's my doubling of my third. So what do? Well, I could go to a D. F, D. Okay. Let's see what that sounds like. I like that. Let's do that. F, D, C. The closest chord tone was an A. I could have done that. Wow. I know he didn't want me doubling up on my A, my third, but I kind of like that better than the D, to be honest. So I guess I'm going to ignore that rule right now because I like the way that sounds. So, all right, so let's move on. Next leap we have is a C back down to an F. Well, the chord I'm in is a C chord. I could have gone to a G, C, G, F. That almost makes sense. I remember originally I decided to put an A in there. Let's hear what this sounds like. You know what? That A doesn't sound great. So I'm going to put a G here. Because that's really my closest chord tone to the F. I mean, so C, closest chord tone between the C and the F is that G. What that sounds like. Yes, definitely like that. And then at the end we have a G up to a C. A G. Next closest chord tone is a B. C. So now here is what it sounds like with the half notes added in. It's coming along. All right, now, my next step. Let's move this up here. My next step, here we are, is now I'm going to modify what I just did. And here's what I start to do. Whenever I see a measure with two half notes in it, like this very first measure, second violin and cello, I take one of those measures and turn it from a half note to a dotted half note quarter. What it does, it just gives, well, here, listen to this measure this way. Now listen to it with the second violin on the dotted half quarter, but leaving the cello in the half. Now, what I could have done, let me do this here, copy, paste. I could have turned the cello part into a dotted half. Let's see what that does. Before, after. I think I like that. I'm going to leave that right the way it is. All right, so you can hear one voice moves on beat 3, the other voice moves on beat 4. We're starting to get some variety here. Now, here's the second measure. We have two voices with half notes. I decided to put the soprano, first violin, make that the dotted half quarter. And initially I left the A to C. Let me do this here real quick. Alone. So it'd be like this. But I've got a big jump between this A and the C. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to go in and play with it just a little bit more. Because there's still, I put a big leap in here. I'm going to do a quarter note. And I'm going to do 2/8 notes here. And I'm going to connect the A and the C. We're in a G chord. I'm sorry, it's not an A. That's a G. My bad. I'm going to go A. Okay, it's a D. Yes. So now listen. Before. Now listen. So let's listen to those two measures. All of a sudden, I'm starting to hear some really cool things happen. All right, third measure, we didn't do any changes. The fourth measure is the next measure. We have 2 half notes. The first violin, I made that the dotted half quarter because I'm starting to see a flow here. That figure is starting to be pretty prominent in that first violin part. So I did that, and I left this guy alone. So now let's listen. I kind of like that. The next measure, we have 2 half notes. We have a measure with 3 here. We have this time I left the first violin on half notes, and I put the dotted half quarter on the viola, and I went C, A. You know, we've got an opportunity here. I'm going to try something here. Split this, connect the dots here. I got C, B, A. And then what if I did dotted quarter like that? Let's hear what this sounds like. Start right here. Okay, I can live with that for the moment. And let's see here. We've got next measure. We have viola and cello. Notice how I put the viola dotted half quarter. And let's see. Let me do a little score adjustment here so we can see all of it together. There we are. And then we ended. Oh, okay. So now let's listen to it from here. It's usually about this point where I start hearing things. For instance, listen to what happens in the viola. I want to hear that viola answer. So what if I did put the same rhythmic figure here? If I did this, put in 2/8 notes here, like that. Let's see what happens there. Move that up to there. Why? Because that's the note I'm hearing. I'm hearing. So. And I don't want it da-da-da. That doesn't sound right as a suspension, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to resolve it. Bum-ba-da-da-dum. Like right there. Now listen. Well, now you're beginning to see some of the process. I would like us now to... I took the next step and I started playing along with some things. And here's just another couple of ideas that I had where I started doing some, what I like to call call and response. If you notice in the first measure, it's a whole note on the first violin part, right? Well, I decided, what if I just fill that measure up with eighth notes? Listen to this. Let's tell me what you think. And I'm looking at it. I'm saying, okay, first violin says something, and then the viola answers with a similar response, and then in measure 3, I change things up. Again, at this point, there's no mechanical, rule-driven reason for doing what I do. At this point, I've been listening to the piece, I've been working on it, and I'm starting to hear things come out. And now I'm going to see what I can do. So have a listen to this. We're going to listen to it from the very beginning through all 3 variations. All right, that about wraps it up. They're contained in all of these samples now are ideas that I would incorporate and will incorporate as I develop this piece further. I hope that this series of lessons has given you some insight, not only how I work, but given you some tools you can use. One really important lesson that needs to be adopted, a habit that needs to be adopted, I should say, I'm going to speak about in our next video. But this should get you started. I'd like you to try the same process on some of the other pieces that we've done in this series already. So I'm going to I'm going to book out of here. Mr. G is about done. It's about 20 minutes. And that's too much for almost any video. Have a great day. Mr. G out. Bye-bye.